I'm going to tell this the same way I told it back then, because I still don't really like typing, and I've never been great at getting the words right. I used one of those voice-to-text things on my phone, and honestly, that fits, because my memory of the night comes in pieces anyway. This happened years ago. I couldn't even give you an exact number without guessing. 6, 7, maybe 8. My life got messy after that, and the timeline in my head isn't clean, but I remember the night itself with a kind of clarity I wish I didn't have. It was New Year's Eve, and I was still dating my ex, Duda. We were heading back from a party, and it had to be after midnight because I remember how heavy my eyelids felt, like they were trying to shut on their own. Driving on New Year's is stupid. I know that. People are drunk, roads are crowded. Everyone's doing something reckless, but we didn't really have a choice. The party was at one of Duda's friends' places. We weren't originally supposed to go. We got added late, and by the time we showed up, every couch and spare bed was already claimed. There was nowhere for us to crash, so we left and started the drive back to Duda's place. It wasn't a super long drive, but it wasn't short either. Around half an hour, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. The roads were mostly empty, which I actually appreciated. Earlier that day it had snowed, and the street had that glazed, slick look where your headlights make the ice shine. The kind of road that feels fine until you need to stop fast. Duda was slumped in the passenger seat, half asleep, head tilted toward the window. I had the heater blasting and some random rock playlist going, anything to keep my brain occupied so I didn't drift. I was tired in that specific way, where you don't realize how tired you are until something snaps you awake. We were maybe 10 minutes from her place when it happened. One second the road in front of me was completely clear. The next, there was a woman standing dead center in the lane, not walking across, not stepping off a curb, just planted there, facing my car like she'd been expecting it, like she'd been waiting for us. For a split second, my mind didn't accept what my eyes were showing me. My foot hit the brake before I fully understood why, and the car immediately started to slide a little, that soft floating feeling you get on ice. My headlights hit her straight on, bleaching her out in the dark. And then I saw what she had in her hand, a knife, hanging down at her side at first. A big kitchen knife, one of those heavy ones you'd use for something like carving meat. The metal flashed when it caught the light. Her face looked wrong, like it was twisted up in pain or panic. It was hard to tell if she was crying, screaming, or both. Everything about her expression made my stomach turn. I reacted without thinking. I jerked the wheel to the right to miss her. The moment I did, she moved. She lunged toward the car, and I heard something hit before my brain could make sense of it. It was like a sharp thud combined with a scrape, and in the same instant, I knew exactly what happened. She'd swung that knife at the side of the car as we passed, but the swerve on that ice was too much. The tires lost grip completely, and the world turned into spinning lights and useless steering. My hands were locked on the wheel like I could force the car to obey me, but it didn't matter. We were sliding and rotating, and for a second it felt like the car belonged to the road, not me. Duda snapped awake mid-spin and immediately started panicking, shouting at me, asking what was happening, telling me to stop, telling me to go. Just pure fear spilling out of her. The car finally came to a stop after turning around, and when everything settled, we were facing the direction we'd just come from, which meant we were facing her. I looked through the windshield and felt this cold, nauseating drop in my chest. She was still there, maybe 30 feet away, lit up by the headlights like a stage spotlight. The knife was still in her hand. She started coming toward us, and the way she moved didn't make sense. Like she was trying to rush, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She was limping, dragging one leg, and it looked like she was hurt. She was screaming something, but it wasn't words I could understand. It was just this raw, broken sound, more like an animal than a person. It didn't even sound like it was coming from a normal throat. I don't know how else to explain it. It was the most frightening thing I've ever heard in real life. Duda was yelling at me to do something, and I couldn't. I sat there staring like my brain had stalled. The woman kept lurching closer, her clothes filthy and ripped, her hair tangled and stuck to her head in clumps. She looked like she'd been outside for days. I couldn't tell if she was high, having some kind of breakdown, or something else entirely. But her eyes were what got me. There was nothing in them. No fear, no reason, no recognition. Just this blank, empty look that made her seem less like someone in trouble and more like something dangerous wearing a person's face. She got closer, 20 feet, maybe 15. That's when my body finally kicked in. I shoved the car into drive and stomped on the gas. For a horrible second, the tires just spun on the ice, the engine whining while the car barely moved. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was shaking my whole chest. Then the tires caught and we surged forward, and for a moment I actually thought we were getting away. Like it was over, like we'd cleared her, and we could just put distance between us. I was wrong. I still don't understand how she moved that fast. 1 second she was in front of the headlights, and the next she was on the car. She threw herself onto the hood so hard the whole vehicle shuddered. Duda screamed so loud it made my ears ring. I shouted something too. I don't even know what. All I know is my entire body flooded with pure panic. The woman clung to the hood with one hand, fingers spread wide against the cold metal, and with the other she started stabbing the windshield again and again. Not a single strike, but a frantic, repeated motion, like she was trying to punch her way through the glass. Each hit made a sharp cracking sound, and the windshield spiderwebbed in front of me, catching the light in jagged lines. I couldn't see properly. I couldn't think properly. I just knew she was right there, inches away from me, and it felt like the only thing keeping her out was a sheet of glass that was already giving up. I started swerving, hard, left, right, left, trying to shake her off. The car fishtailed with each turn, and every time the back end slid, it felt like we were about to spin out again. She slid across the hood, her body scraping along the metal, but she refused to let go. That scream never stopped, that same wordless sound, and her face kept popping into view through the fractured windshield, close enough that I could see the strain in her jaw. And I swear her eyes stayed locked on mine the entire time, like she wasn't even looking for a place to hold on, just staring straight at me like she wanted me to know exactly who she was trying to get to. After the third or fourth violent swerve, she finally lost her grip. I saw her roll off the side of the hood, hit the pavement hard, and slide toward the shoulder like a rag doll. The car lurched and fishtailed again, but somehow I managed to keep it straight this time. My arms were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her lying there on the ground. She wasn't moving, and this is the part that still makes me feel sick. A piece of me wanted to stop. Even after everything, even after she tried to stab her way into the car, my brain went to the worst possible thought, that maybe she wasn't some monster, maybe she was just a mentally ill person, maybe she needed help, and maybe I'd just killed her. Duda grabbed my arm so hard it hurt and told me not to stop. She was trembling, repeating that we had to go, that we couldn't get involved, that it wasn't our problem. I told her we should at least call the police. She shut that down immediately. She started talking fast, saying the cops would blame us because we'd been drinking, that nobody would believe our story, that we'd get arrested. Looking back, it doesn't even fully add up. But in that moment, with my windshield cracked and my hands still locked in a death grip, it sounded urgent. It sounded plausible. Duda had always been good at that, making something feel both logical and immediate, like there was only one right move and you had to do it now. So I didn't stop. I drove us all the way home and we didn't tell anyone. The next day and the days after, I kept replaying it. The damage to the car wasn't as dramatic as it felt in the moment. The windshield was cracked. There were marks where the knife had scraped along my driver's side window, a few scratches on the hood. What shocked me most was there wasn't any blood. Not on the hood, not on the windshield, nothing obvious. I got the car fixed about a week later, but fixing the car didn't fix what was stuck in my head. For months, I checked local news, half expecting to see something about a body on the side of the road, a missing person report, anything that would tell me what happened after we drove away. Nothing ever showed up. I don't know if that made it better or worse. Some nights I'd tell myself she got up and wandered off into the woods. Other nights I'd picture her still lying there, and I'd feel that same nausea all over again. Part of me wanted a definite answer, and part of me was terrified of what that answer would be. But the thing that messed with me in a different way was Duda. She acted like it never happened. Within a couple days, she was back to normal, making plans, going out, talking about random stuff like the world hadn't almost ended for us on that road. When I brought it up once, she got irritated with me, like I was inconveniencing her. She told me I was overreacting, that we did what we had to do. I remember just looking at her, trying to understand how someone could be that cold about it. A woman tried to get into our car with a knife. We might have killed her, and she could shrug it off like it was a near miss in traffic. We broke up a few months later for reasons that didn't have much to do with that night. Mostly, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't change something permanently. After that, I didn't look at her the same way. Maybe I'm the one who's messed up, but I don't think something like that is supposed to leave you in 2 days. I still think about it sometimes. Late at night, when the roads are quiet and the snow makes everything look too clean, because one way or another, that night could have ended with someone dead. And the worst part is, I'll probably never know how close it came. I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad. That's where I met one of my closest friends, a guy I've always called Garrett. His actual name is Guo, but freshman year he introduced himself using his American name, and it just kind of became what everyone called him. He's originally from Hong Kong. He came to the States to study computer science, and I'm not exaggerating when I say he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. After graduation, we ended up on opposite sides of the world. I moved to New York for work, and he went back to Hong Kong for work. We're both in our late 20s now, both doing fine career-wise, both still single. We make it a point to see each other once or twice a year. Sometimes he flies out to me. Sometimes I go to Asia. I know how lucky that is, and I try not to take it for granted. This happened last New Year's Eve, and it still sits in the back of my mind almost every day. I've told a handful of people, and every time I do, they just kind of stare at me, like they're waiting for the part where it makes sense. It never does. I don't know what to make of it either. One thing that matters here is the time difference. Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York, so when it's midnight in Hong Kong, it's still late morning on December 31st in New York City. Garrett celebrates both the usual New Year and the Chinese New Year, so he was out that night doing what most people do, drinking, partying, being out way too late, just earlier than me because of where he was. In New York, I spent New Year's Eve with my two closest friends in the city, Rylan and Ari. We started at Rylan's apartment with drinks. Then later we went to a rooftop party in Williamsburg. One of Ari's co-workers invited us. It was actually nicer than I expected. For Brooklyn especially, it wasn't some packed, grimy thing. It felt organized. There was a real bar set up, decent lighting, a DJ, people dressed like they planned ahead. Around 11:30, I noticed a girl standing near the bar by herself. I don't know why I decided to go talk to her. I was buzzed, I guess. And the mood that night makes everyone act a little more confident than they normally are. I walked over, introduced myself, and it clicked immediately. She was easy to talk to, funny, without trying too hard. She had this kind of energy that pulled you in, like you'd known her longer than you had. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before she grabbed my hand and dragged me out onto the dance floor. Her name was Matra. I remember asking her to say it again because I'd never heard it before. She laughed and told me most people just call her My Tree because that's basically how it sounds. I remember thinking it was cute in a simple way. At some point, she took a pen and wrote it on my hand, like she didn't trust me to remember. It felt playful, normal, like the kind of thing you look at later and smile about. After that, things moved fast. We danced, we kept talking in little bursts between songs, and when midnight hit, we kissed. By around 12:30, she leaned in close and asked if I wanted to leave. So we got an Uber and went back to my place in the East Village. I'll skip over the obvious parts, but I will say it was a really good night. Afterward, we stayed up for a while just talking. It's the way people do when the music is gone and you're both still awake, and the room feels quieter than it should. I learned a surprising amount about her, and I only remember it so clearly because those details ended up being the only proof I had later. Here's what I remember. She said she was originally from San Diego. She was an artist, specifically a painter, but she told me she used to do graffiti and murals before switching into more traditional work. Her middle name was Mia, and she said that was also one of her cat's names. The other cat was named Cosmo. Her birthday was April 28th. She mentioned her childhood best friend was from a tiny town in Germany called Hildesheim. She told me her dad was a patent lawyer. Random stuff, I know. At the time, it was just conversation. It only mattered later because it was so specific. At one point, she said her clothes smelled like the bar, and I offered to wash them. I threw everything in the wash for her. She didn't argue. I gave her one of my t-shirts to sleep in, and she put it on like it was the most normal thing in the world. We fell asleep not long after that. I can't tell you what time it was. Late enough that the city outside sounded muted. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone. At first, I didn't panic. People leave after hookups. It happens all the time. I assumed she slipped out early to avoid the awkward "so what now?" talk, and I wasn't offended by that. I laid there for a minute, half asleep, listening to the quiet in my apartment. Then I got up to use the bathroom, and something small stopped me cold. My front door was locked, not just shut, locked. The deadbolt engaged. The problem is, my lock is the kind you can't throw from the outside unless you have a key. It doesn't auto-lock. If you leave my apartment, you pull the door closed behind you, and that's it. To lock it from the hallway, you need my key. Mitra didn't have my key. She couldn't have locked it behind her after leaving. So the way I saw it, there were only two options. Either she somehow locked it from the outside with no key, or she never left at all, and neither of those made any sense. I checked the rest of the apartment. It's not big. One bedroom, one bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen. There's no back door, no fire escape exit. The windows barely open a few inches, and even if they did, I'm not on the ground floor where someone could just climb out and drop down. I even checked my closet like a paranoid idiot, like she was going to be crouched in there holding her breath. It was empty. That's when I started feeling this creeping, unreal doubt, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Like maybe I was more drunk than I realized and my brain filled in the blanks. I paced around my apartment in circles, looking at corners, at doorways, half expecting her to suddenly appear and make it all feel normal again. But then I noticed more. Her clothes weren't in my dryer. I knew I'd put them there. And the t-shirt I loaned her, gone too. It wasn't on the floor, not in the bed, not in the bathroom. That should have been comforting proof that she'd actually been there, but it only made it worse. If her stuff was gone, she left. If she left, how was my door locked? I stood in the middle of my living room trying to force an explanation to form, and nothing fit. And then I realized something else that made me feel even dumber. I never got her phone number. I didn't add her on anything. I had no contact info at all, just a name I'd never heard before, written on my hand in pen that was already starting to fade. For the rest of the day, I kept replaying everything I could remember about her, repeating those little details like a list I couldn't afford to lose. San Diego, painter, used to do graffiti. April 28th, cats named Mia and Cosmo, Hildesheim in Germany. Dad is a patent lawyer. I kept saying them in my head because I knew that in a week, Even with how weird this felt, the specifics would blur. Later that afternoon, out of nowhere, I felt this strong urge to call Garrett. I can't explain why. It wasn't planned. I wasn't even thinking about him at that moment. It was just this sudden, insistent feeling, like my brain nudging me and saying, call him. So I did. We caught up like normal at first. Work, life, how our New Year's celebrations went. But something about him felt off through the phone. His voice was flatter than usual, like he was distracted. Eventually I asked him what was going on. He hesitated, then told me he'd met a girl the night before. They'd hit it off, ended up back at his place, and she left in the morning without saying goodbye. No number, no way to reach her. He sounded disappointed, like he'd actually liked her and was annoyed at himself for not getting her contact. I laughed because it was such a weird coincidence, and I told him the same thing happened to me, not just the she left part. I told him about waking up and realizing she was gone, and how I didn't even have her number. I said it was basically identical. There was a pause. Then he told me her name. He said it was Matra, pronounced like my tree. I felt this cold ripple go through my whole body, like my skin tightened for a second. I asked him to describe her, and he started listing details in a casual way at first, like he didn't realize what he was doing to me. San Diego, artist, painter, used to do graffiti and murals. I cut him off and asked about her cat named Mia. He went quiet on the other end of the line, and when he finally answered, he sounded different. Smaller, like the idea had just hit him too. He said yes. After that, we started trading details back and forth, almost talking over each other. Her other cat, Cosmo. The birthday, April 28th. The best friend from some tiny German town called Hillesheim. Her dad being a patent lawyer. It all lined up piece after piece, like we were reading from the same page. It didn't feel like a funny coincidence anymore. It felt wrong, like the air in the room got heavier. Then Garrett said he had pictures. I didn't. I never took any photos with her. But he did, and he showed them to me. It was the same girl. I don't mean similar. I mean I recognized her immediately. Same face, same smile. Same everything. I was 100% sure. We tried to explain it. We threw out every idea we could think of. Twins, a scam, someone lying, some elaborate setup, but nothing held up. And the one thing we couldn't escape was the time. Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. Garrett met her around 11 p.m. on December 31st, Hong Kong time. I met her around 11:30 p.m. on December 31st, New York time. That's about a 12-hour gap. But a flight from Hong Kong to New York takes at least 15 hours, and usually longer, more like 16 or 17. Even in a perfect scenario, even if she ran out of Garrett's building and got on a plane immediately, there's no way she could have been at that rooftop party in Williamsburg in time. The numbers don't work. It's not even close. And even if you ignore travel time like it doesn't matter, it raises questions that make even less sense. How would she end up at that exact party? How would she walk into the same kind of night with me, use the same name, tell the same life story, remember the same personal details? Garrett and I have talked about it over and over since then, probably more than a dozen times. Every time we circle the same drain, we don't have an answer, and we probably never will. Neither one of us ever saw her again. The part that messes with me the most is how solid it felt. It didn't feel like a blurry, drunken night that my brain filled in later. I talked to her for hours. I remember the way she laughed when I asked her to repeat her name. I remember the pen dragging across my skin when she wrote it on my hand. She slept in my bed. I washed her clothes. And then she disappeared from a locked apartment with no other way out. We both tried looking her up online, but Matra with no last name, plus artist from San Diego, isn't exactly a useful search. We found nothing. No profiles that matched, no website, no gallery, nothing that made her feel like a real person you could track down. New Year's Eve is coming up again, which is why I've been thinking about it so much lately. Most weird experiences fade with time. You replay them less, they soften around the edges. They start to feel like stories you tell instead of memories you live in. For me, it's been the opposite. The more time passes, the stranger it feels. And I hate that my mind keeps landing on the same ridiculous thought, the one I don't even want to say out loud because it sounds insane. But I still don't have a better explanation for what happened. This story isn't mine. It's one my dad told me a few times over the years, and every time he told it, you could hear he still didn't like thinking about it. Before he had kids, my dad and my mom traveled a lot. He made a couple smart business decisions in his mid-20s, so he had money to spend and, more importantly, the time to actually enjoy it. They were both really into skiing, but if you live in New York City and you want decent slopes without flying somewhere, Vermont is basically the option. Over the years, they ended up buying a few lodges up there. The first one was in Lello. They bought it from a guy named Mr. Black, who lived on West End Avenue in the city. The place had these dark shutters, and between that and the previous owner's name, my dad always called it the Black House. They'd sell quarter shares to friends and rotate who used it every few months to help offset the cost. They kept that place for a few years, then eventually moved on to a second property. The second lodge was about halfway between Lello and Rutland, right along Route 100, in an area locals called the Lake District. There are a handful of lakes lined up along that stretch, and their house sat right on the edge of one of them. My dad went in on that lodge with his friend Victor and Victor's wife Lisa. Victor and my dad had been close since college, and the four of them would go up there together pretty regularly. This happened on a New Year's Eve, before I was born. I can't tell you the exact year. Lisa and my mom weren't there. They were away for a friend's wedding or something like that. The details don't really matter. What matters is it was just my dad and Victor that trip, and they decided to drive up to Vermont together to spend New Year's away from the city. It was the night of December 31st. The two of them were upstairs having a few beers, catching up the way guys do when there's nowhere else to be. The upstairs of that lodge had these full-length windows facing the lake. My dad said they loved sitting up there because you could watch the snow come down over the frozen water. That night, it was snowing, but not in a way that made you feel trapped. More like a steady, quiet snowfall that makes everything look softer and farther away. He described it as one of those rare, peaceful nights. Just two friends, music on low, a warm room, and nothing around you except cold woods and a frozen lake. They had the radio going too, waiting for the Times Square countdown like people always do, even when you're not actually anywhere near it. Then, in the middle of a conversation, the whole mood got ripped apart. A bright flash lit up the far side of the lake. My dad said his first thought was fireworks, because it was New Year's Eve and you expect random flashes in the distance. But this wasn't up in the sky. It wasn't a burst above the trees. It looked like it came from the ground, on the far bank, like something down low suddenly exploded with light. And the weird part was there was no sound, just this silent, blinding white flash that made the windows glow. Victor stood up immediately and walked closer to the glass, trying to see across the lake. My dad asked what he was doing, and Victor said he thought he saw something moving out there. It was dark, obviously, but with snow on a frozen lake, you get this faint natural brightness. If you stare long enough, you can pick out shapes. Victor kept watching, and after a few seconds, he was sure. He told my dad there was a person out on the ice. My dad told him that was impossible. There weren't any houses on that side, no road, no trail, nothing, just trees. The far side of the lake was basically untouched woods, but Victor wasn't letting it go. He started pulling on his coat and boots like it was the most normal thing in the world to walk onto a frozen lake at night. My dad tried to talk him out of it. He said it made no sense, that it was probably a trick of the light, that it was New Year's and people do dumb stuff with fireworks and flares. Victor didn't want to hear it. He was already going downstairs. So my dad grabbed his jacket and followed him. They pushed out onto the back deck, and as soon as they did, they heard it. A voice. Young, high and thin in the cold air. A little kid yelling for help. My dad said it was faint at first, like the sound had to fight its way across the open ice, but it was clear enough that there was no mistaking it. A child was out there, somewhere on the lake, calling out over and over. The lake had been frozen solid for months. That part my dad stressed. It wasn't early winter ice. It wasn't questionable. It was the kind of cold where the ice is thick and hard, and there's no water sound at all, so they didn't stop to debate whether it was safe. They didn't pause and think about how strange it was. They just went. They stepped off the deck and started walking out onto the lake. As they got closer, they could finally make out a shape near the far side, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the bank. Small. Too small to be an adult. My dad said you could see the outline against the snow like a dark cutout, and it looked like a kid standing there, facing toward them. They kept moving, trying to close the distance, and then it happened again. Another flash. My dad said it was so bright he had to throw an arm up over his face. He dropped down, more out of instinct than anything, because it felt like staring into a welding torch. For a few seconds he couldn't see. Just white spots and darkness. When his vision finally came back and he looked up, the kid was gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone. There was nothing on the ice but open snow and the flat, empty stretch of frozen lake. That's when my dad said the feeling changed completely. Up until then, it had been confusion and concern. The second that figure vanished, it turned into real fear. They spun around and started moving back toward the house as fast as they could without wiping out. My dad said running on ice at night is a special kind of panic because your body wants speed, but you know one bad step could put you on your back. Victor was a few steps ahead when he suddenly shouted and pointed. He was pointing at the upstairs windows of the lodge. Victor said there was someone standing there, not an adult, a kid. My dad looked up. He said all he saw was dark glass reflecting the snow and the faint glow from inside. He didn't see a face. He didn't see a body. Victor insisted he saw a boy right there in the window, looking down at them like he'd been watching the whole thing. My dad didn't know what to say. He just wanted to get indoors. They reached the house, got inside, and searched the entire place. Every room, every closet, every corner you could hide in. Nothing. Doors were locked. Windows were shut. No sign anyone had been in there at all. After that, they basically gave up on the night. My dad said neither of them wanted to sit back upstairs with the radio and pretend things were normal again. They didn't even really talk about it. They just went to their rooms and tried to sleep, and neither of them even noticed when midnight passed. My dad told me he woke up twice that night. Both times he was sure he heard a child laughing somewhere in the lodge. Not outside, inside, like a quiet, playful laugh that didn't fit the empty house at all. He lay there in the dark, listening hard, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, and both times it stopped before he could. The thing that bothered him most, though, wasn't the voice on the lake, or even Victor swearing he saw a kid in the window. It was that light, that silent, blinding flash that came from nowhere. He said he and Victor talked about it for years afterward, trying to explain it like adults who don't want to admit something scared them. They went through possibilities, lightning, a flare, fireworks from some distant town, but nothing matched. There was no source, no sound, no reason it would happen twice like that, and then never again. They cut the trip short after that, and my dad said they didn't tell my mom or Lisa when they got back. Not right away. They kept it to themselves for a long time. Like speaking it out loud would make it more real. Even now, he still doesn't know what happened out there. He's told me the story maybe 3 or 4 times, and every time he gets to the part with the flash, his voice always slows down, like he's seeing it again through those windows. I asked him once if he thought it was something supernatural. He just shrugged, like he didn't want to pick a word for it. And he told me he honestly didn't know what else it could have been.